Incredible structures across the land. Immense achievements, especially in the United States, where in a very short amount of time, not just a few cities, but an entire nation was constructed. Wondrous cities and an incredible population growth of 1,000%. And even beyond the United States, there are compelling and amazing structures with unique and great details on the interior. What's really the origin behind these structures? Is there some sort of hidden hand or some sort of special secret organization that is responsible for the true knowledge behind these structures, their actual origin? Or is it simply a coincidence, as many of these structures have other origins and they're affiliated with well-known organizations? In this exploration, we're going to examine the concept of the secret organization. What really is a secret organization? Are we all alone and trapped in some sort of labyrinth trying to find our way out? Do we have an easy answer where we see certain symbols that are repeated in many places? And how do secret organizations explain the existence of our present reality? The first question we have is, what exactly is a secret organization? We oftentimes are informed that secret organizations are simply a part of our lives, that they are part of our mainstream existence, in fact. That secret organizations are as American as apple pie. There was a time frame in the United States, in the latter third of the 1800s, that we'll be taking a closer look at, where secret organizations were known to be the mainstay of American culture and had vast membership. Everything from the independent order of Oddfellows to the very well-known Masons had many Americans that were members. There was even a response within the United States to this concept of secret organizations, with many deeming it as un-American or dangerous to have things that went behind the scenes that were not transparent to the people. Did it not fly in the face of democracy? Well, our current mainstream media will tell us that such a movement was ill-founded and based on paranoia. There should be no questioning of any sort of organization, whether it's secret or otherwise. But how exactly do we define a secret organization? If we're aware of an organization's existence, is it truly secret? And we are certainly made well aware of many organizations' existence. So how, in fact, secret are they? And if there was a political movement, which historically there was in the United States, that was against secret organizations, most famously the Anti-Masonic Party, which rose in the 1830s and then abruptly disappeared, although that Anti-Masonic Party is affiliated with the beginning of political conventions. And why do we have the popularity of these secret organizations, even in fiction, such as in the Batman series with the Court of Owls? What do these secret organizations really tell us about ourselves and our society? Is there a reason why we assign something with the word secret and why it has such power? Well, our friends in The Guardian, a UK publication, tells us that Americans are obsessed with secret societies. And it should be noted that this is a more recent article within the last 2 years. But I find it very intriguing that when you look at other publications from The Guardian, they talk about secret societies and public figures who belong to them. Now, I'm well aware this article is over 9 years old, and of course in terms of media time frame, that may as well be 10,000 years ago, because of all the different headlines that we have every day. And just because the media contradicted itself is not necessarily a sign of anything amorphous, it's merely good objective journalism. Recall that The Guardian is an independent funded media source and originated from the Manchester Guardian. By the way, have you ever actually looked at old newspapers from the 1800s, whether they're from the United Kingdom, the United States, or any other nation? Actually look at them and see how much different they are compared to the way our current media operates. Now, of course, we didn't have the technology ostensibly then, but it's really interesting to go back to the 1800s and look at the origin of the table of organization, or the organizational chart, as it's known as. Here with the railroads, and of course, that was the incipience of all organizational charts, was the railroads. And from the 1800s, what else would it be? organizational charts are very paramount for understanding how any sort of organization is arrayed and organized. And it shows it, as we are all graphical learners, or as we like to say, we learn by seeing pictures. And you can look at previous US elections and see a very different concept of political parties. Democratic Republican Party? Isn't that interesting? The Federalist Party? And so it would appear that there was a different organization of politics in the past, but we expect that with a democracy. A table of organization helps us understand and sees many of these things. Even gaming, where we have certain societies that have powerful secret organizations behind them. And thus we have the true statement of the United States that secret societies are truly American as apple pie. That the success and the birth of American democracy is attributed to the existence of these organizations that were secret. So we look at the golden age of fraternalism, and of course it's after the United States Civil War, or the latter third of the 1800s. Really, you could just say anything after 1866. And we have different grand lodges of organizations, such as the Independent Order of Oddfellows, which even had a larger membership than the Masons in the early 1900s. And also the Grand Army of the Republic. Isn't that interesting? That looks like our very favorite cartouche that we tend to see in many different structures and buildings, and yet has no official meaning affiliated with it. The existence of the Grand Army of the Republic, again as part of this golden age of fraternalism in the United States, is quite intriguing. An organization comprised entirely of veterans of the Union Army from the United States Civil War. And ostensibly, this was a very powerful organization. It dictated many political policies across the nation and even put several presidents in power, according to the official history. One of its leading members was the great General Ambrose Burnside. Of course, I say great general by his personality and his very unique look. His military success on the battlefield, according to official history, was, well, lacking. We also have Katie Brownell here, who was not depicted in Ken Burns' Civil War for reasons unknown, but she was a very interesting female soldier from the United States Civil War. Part of a Rhode Island regiment who went along to assist her husband and then just ended up taking part in the battles and even wearing a uniform, and she was inducted in the Grand Army of the Republic. How intriguing that there was once this very powerful veterans organization. Now you're probably saying, well, what's secret about a veterans organization? Everybody knew about it. But were there any certain events going on with this veterans organization that people weren't aware of? Much as we always talk about with these so-called secret organizations. What really makes them secret if we know about all of them? Well, what if it's possible that there are certain details about these organizations that we're not familiar with? And that even includes the Grand Army of the Republic. It's very interesting when you go around certain areas in the United States and you'll see vast structures and cemeteries that are dedicated to the Grand Army of the Republic. And also as part of that golden age of fraternalism, we even have this impressive monument near Washington, D.C., in Virginia to be specific, dedicated to the first president and the ranking and always ranking officer of the United States Army, George Washington. Very, very interesting parades and displays, though, that occurred in the late 1800s. For example, this is supposed to be the USS Kearsarge, and it looks to be a life-size replica in the great city of Indianapolis. Is it just a replica, or is it some sort of mock-up that was built to commemorate the Civil War? I'm always interested by the fact that there were so many commemorations for the Civil War, especially in the 1890s. Well, I guess it was the 30-year anniversary, and that's when they wanted to celebrate it. Even here in the modest community of Blue Earth, Minnesota, we have the Grand Army of the Republic, this impressive veterans organization, and some lovely old world buildings around it that they could easily build. But what are these organizations? Why do they wear interesting attire, costumes if we will, and take part in rather interesting ceremonies that we're not privy to? We know of their existence, but what exactly are they doing? Well, the mainstream media tells us that we certainly shouldn't question them. And we even have pictures of individuals outside of the United States, this particular individual from Canada, who was part of the Knights Templar, and you can see the different uniforms. And I don't know if these were taken at different time frames. This is attributed to be the same individual, but maybe there was facial hair that went along with the uniform on the left that he put on. I'm not really sure. But what do we really have with the organizations such as the Independent Order of Oddfellows? What an interesting name. I mean, the name itself seems to be designed to gain attention, much as the rather elaborate costumes and all of the intricate ceremonies that apparently take place. So we have to ask this question, are these organizations really designed simply to draw our attention? Why is it that the media tells us that we shouldn't be thinking and talking about them, but then the media actually thinks and talks about them? I know, it's just good journalism. It's in the vein of the Daily Planet and Perry White. The job of informing the people falls to the trustworthy media. But we look at one of our interesting organizations that you may not have heard of, the Independent Order of Oddfellows. A very interesting organization that owes its roots officially in the United Kingdom, or Great Britain at the time, in the 1700s. And yet, looking deeper in this organization of Oddfellows, as it was originally called, it has mythical roots even going back to the times of Rome. Is that true? Well, the official history says that that's a dubious claim. Of course, are all these claims dubious? And what you'll notice that the Independent Order of Oddfellows came from is that they have many symbols that are similar to other organizations. And John Wilkes, apparently a radical publisher or radical writer himself, who eventually became more conservative according to the official history. And he was one of the original members of this Order of Oddfellows in Great Britain. It's also interesting to note that King George IV himself was a member of the Order of Oddfellows. He was also a member of the Masons. So I guess if you're a person in power, even a member of the royal family, you're still going to join multiple organizations that are attributed to be secret. And then, of course, there's Thomas Wildey, the individual who originally came from Great Britain into the United States in the 18-teens and founded the Independent Order of Oddfellows in the United States because he found out that people needed help and he looked for any other individuals that were members. And it was from there that was the grand start of this great organization, the Independent Order of Oddfellows. Quite an intriguing looking individual himself, I have to say. Now, I'm not criticizing anyone's rather unique physical appearance, merely pointing out that it's very, very interesting. It's interesting to think there was this one individual in Baltimore who came from the United Kingdom that started all of this. Or is that the official history, or is it just simply something that we're told? There are many structures that are attributed to the Oddfellows. And it should be noted that in our explorations of asylums, we've come across certain structures that are affiliated with the Oddfellows. Orphanages, in fact, or orphan asylums as they were called in the 1800s, were run by members of the Oddfellows. And this was part of their openly stated benign attempt to help people. Now, am I pointing my finger and suggesting that these secret organizations are evil or good or one way or the other? Not necessarily. Merely pointing out what the official history tells us about them. And why is it wrong for us to have an interest and really understand and know what's going on? I seem to recall there are other individuals, especially people who describe themselves as skeptics, who tell us in the United States or any other Western democracy that we need to be well informed of events so we can make informed decisions. But then why do those same people tell us that we shouldn't study certain things? It's quite an interesting contradiction in my mind. But you'll find that there are many different images that show vast membership to this Independent Order of Oddfellows. This rather interesting mythical origin that they have, dating all the way back to the Roman Empire, and the connections that they have with the royalty. Now, it's safe to say that various high-ranking members of society have numerous memberships in different organizations or secret organizations, such as Senator Robert Byrd here, who was a member of the Independent Order of Oddfellows. Robert Byrd still holds the record for the longest-serving senator in the United States. And he has quite an interesting and, dare I say, storied and colorful career that you can look up, and all the different events that he was involved in. So what's really the origin then with these incredible structures? Were these organizations that were not necessarily secret in the knowledge of their existence, but secret in certain activities, construct? Did they have some sort of knowledge of this impressive architectural capability that they could build these structures? Did they have their own trained architects, their own trained contractors who could erect these structures? And it's important to note that you can still find many remaining structures of the independent order of Oddfellows across the United States, in many small towns, even in the Midwest. Janesville, Wisconsin, for example, has a remaining surviving structure. And there's even the Asylum in Liberty, Missouri, which we have some very dramatic images of, with rather unique symbols across it. Now, perhaps we could associate these symbols with some of the esoteric symbols that are affiliated with the independent order of Oddfellows. And yes, we'll see that there are symbols that tend to overlap. And even here in Janesville, Wisconsin, Wisconsin Lodge number 14, instituted in 1847. And of course, it's an old world building because what else would it be? And you may recall when we did our exploration of Janesville, one of the very first town or city explorations on this channel, we saw that there had been a lot of altered architecture, but you could still see the remnants of the old world architecture in Janesville. Other intriguing remnants of the independent order of Oddfellows, such as this particular member who decided to donate his body for display once he passed away. I believe this is located at the remaining facility in Liberty, Missouri. And Charlie Chaplin, the actor, world-famous actor from silent films, and also famous for his appearance in The Dictator. I still appreciate his closing speech at the end of that film. He was also a known member of the independent order of Oddfellows. And so, looking at some of these symbols and these famous characters who were members of these organizations, what exactly do they represent? Why is there always that all-seeing eye depicted? And these are different organizations, and what exactly do these symbols really mean? And I've had many people say in the comments section that, well, your symbol shows that you're a member of a secret society. It's rather intriguing to me that we oftentimes have people who say things like this, as though we want to attribute everyone to being a member of a secret society. Such as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was a member of the Independent Order of Oddfellows, and he was also a member of another secret organization we're going to look at, the Knights of Pythias. So what exactly was all this about? Is this really just a benign organization, the Friday, October 18th Oddfellows Comedy Night, and you can go down there and hear stand-up comedy and that's all it really is? Were they all really just benign and setting up all these asylums to genuinely take care of these orphans? Maybe. Or there could be a completely different explanation. Perhaps the real point behind these organizations is simply to assign our attention to them. And maybe there's something else going on completely behind the scenes. You would think that being a member of these organizations, if they really did bring any benefit, would have benefited President William McKinley. But we recall how he tragically ended up in that assassination in the Buffalo World's Fair in the early 1900s. And yet, looking at the history of some of these other structures, such as the one in Liberty, Missouri, is there something more going on with their history? Do we have a different concept of history with a lot of these structures? Could they have actually had a different role that was assigned at a different point and changed and then affiliated with this organization that received responsibility for it? It is interesting, though, if you pay attention to small towns and large cities, you'll see just how many old structures still contain the markings of the Independent Order of Oddfellows. Again, the fraternal organization in the United States that at one point in time had a larger number of members than the Masons. They're still active to this day, and for the most part they seem to be well integrated within the community. And in fact, if you go to Janesville, Wisconsin, you could even go to the little bar and tavern that's on the ground floor of the Independent Order of Oddfellows building, Lodge 14. I've never been there myself, but I'm sure they have good food and good drinks. Even William Jennings Bryan, the three-time presidential candidate, although he never actually won the presidency, but quite a famous individual who will certainly be remembered from history during that very interesting time of the 1890s to the 1920s. Again, we look at some of these intriguing symbols that we have, and just looking at them objectively, why is it that the Oddfellows at one point in time were really the most well-known and organization that had the highest amount of members, and then they seemed to fall off a little bit. Well, there's a couple different explanations given for how the political and social situation changed in the United States. Also interesting that an organization that was founded in Great Britain and the United Kingdom rose to such prominence in the United States. And if you look up its official history, it even talks about that when the original founder came to the United States and how there was such a strong anti-British sentiment in the United States in the early 1800s after the War of 1812. A very interesting conflict in and of itself. Of course, a short 100 years later in the early 1900s, and the United States and Great Britain or the United Kingdom were the best of friends with the special relationship that endures to this day with the Atlantic Charter. Now moving on, let's take a look at the Knights of Pythias. Founded on this site, charter granted by President Lincoln in 1864. So another fraternal order, not necessarily secret because we know about it. It's a charter granted by the president. So what actually makes it secret? Well, apparently their activities that we're not always privy to. And we have some very interesting artwork and symbolism that's associated with the Knights of Pythias. And what exactly were they all about? Or is it Knights of Pythias? No, it's Knights of Pythias, but interesting also considering pronunciations. And there's some very unique mythical depictions and rather interesting symbolism. Now I will say this, when you look at the Knights of Pythias, they seem to have a little bit more of a unique concept to their symbols. There are again some of the usual symbols that we see that are replicated or perhaps shared by other organizations. And do they all have the same root organization? And of course the Knights of Pythias have their own impressive structures that happen to appear in not just large cities, but also in small cities and small towns, such as this impressive castle, as they call it, in Boonville, Missouri. Boonville, Missouri, where they had Kemper Military Academy, until it was closed in the early 2000s, a series of old world structures that were lost. And all over, whether you're in Alabama or Virginia, and in certain places in the South, this interesting organization was quite prominent. And we typically think, at least in the mainstream concept, that the South in the United States is not very tolerant of secret organizations, but the Knights of Pythias seem to flourish in the South, such as this particular castle or headquarters building, or chapter or lodge, or all the other names that we have for them, in Alabama. Not exactly a state that we would think of as being welcoming to such an organization, but here it is. And the Knights of Pythias took part in many marches and wearing uniforms and having grand social events. Now that's really where we have to look at things. We looked at the Veterans Organization, the Grand Army of the Republic, from, again, this golden age of fraternalism. We looked at the Independent Order of Oddfellows and the Knights of Pythias. And they all seem to wear uniforms and take part in what appears to be military drills. And then, of course, this impressive Flatiron building here in Indianapolis. This was another casualty of urban renewal in the late 1960s. Ah, look, our favorite cartouche. And here you can see it in Indianapolis, and of course the great monument to soldiers off to the left there with the look of the mausoleum of Helicanarsis. Again, that mausoleum, one of the wonders of the ancient world that was lost a long time ago, but somehow we know exactly what it looks like, and we have no shortage of structures that attempt to emulate it. But there's other structures that remind us of the Knights of Pythias, and isn't this interesting with these wondrous towers, bell towers, and interesting cones that give us a fairy tale impression on what looks to be a very modest building, but yet the front of it is certainly anything but modest. So again, asking that question, did the Knights of Pythias have their own architectural experts who had these special techniques available? Did they have access to their own contractors? Well, back in the 1800s, you could really just pull anybody off the street, give them a little bit of money, and really they could build anything according to any sort of complicated architectural plan, including geometric precision and arches. And once again, what exactly is going on with all the parades and uniforms? You can't help but notice that there is definitely a military component to these organizations, these fraternal organizations that we still classify as secret. And the Knights of Pythias are no exception to this. But why is it that this was so encouraged and so tolerated in the 1800s? Is it because we just simply didn't have anything better to do? Why is it everybody wanted to be a member of these organizations? And why was it the movement against these organizations just simply went away? Well, as I said, the mainstream media will tell us that opposition to secret organizations, at least certain secret organizations, is not to be encouraged. It should also be noted that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was also a member of the Knights of Pythias, so Independent Order of Oddfellows and Knights of Pythias. What a coincidence. Why exactly would someone who's a ranking public figure want to be members of multiple organizations? Same thing with President William McKinley. He was also a member of the Knights of Pythias in addition to being a member of the Independent Order of Oddfellows. Now, we also go back to our original example of the king in Great Britain being a member of 2 secret organizations. Why would you need to be a member of secret organizations if you're actually part of the royal family? I'm just asking the question, and I'm inviting comments in terms of that question. William Jennings Bryan, also an individual who was a member of multiple organizations. And maybe that was just what you did at that time frame. Yes, Lew Wallace, the author of Ben-Hur, who took part in the Battle of Shiloh and had a lot of controversy associated with it. Although, what really was the sequence of events in the Civil War is quite intriguing. And you see that he had the beard of awesomeness as well, unlike the sideburns of Ambrose Burnside. But Lew Wallace never led the Grand Army of the Republic. And we think of other fraternal organizations. Of course, the great legacy of fraternities in colleges and universities in the United States. You can even go back and watch the 1970s film Animal House to see exactly how popular culture considered fraternities. There was the ruckus fraternity of the Delta House. And we think of the character of John Blatarsky, an individual who had been in college for 6-7 years, much as his famous line said, "I can't believe it, 7 years of college down the drain." And even when Dean Wormer told him that his GPA was 0.0. That didn't stop John Blatarsky from graduating, though, because he was a member of Delta House. And how exactly did John Blatarsky end up? He became a senator. Of course, much like Robert Byrd became a senator. Isn't that an interesting little overlap? I know it's just a movie, and then you contrast them with the Omegas, such as Niedermeyer. Yes, the other fraternal house that engages in very strange ceremonies, such as the paddling of the swollen ass with a paddle. Another humiliation ritual. It should also be noted that there are fraternal organizations within the United States military itself, such as Pershing Rifles, where you can earn yourself a very impressive looking cord and a unique coloring with it. Yes, the United States military, an organization based on achievement, and yet if you join a certain organization, you can wear a special uniform appendage. And the secret military units that are in the United States military, such as the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment, or even rumors of a unit simply called that, the unit. What exactly is membership in these secret units really about? And are there actual secret units, or is it all just a rumor? There seem to be a lot of inclinations that there are unknown units that exist, not just in the United States military, but in militaries across the land. And is that really representative of a democracy, or is it simply necessary? What happens if you join one of these secret units, and what exactly happens to your sense of self and your personality if you do so? Does it really give you additional individual power, or do you find yourself being subservient to the needs of the other? Let's look at a true secret organization. And I want you to end this exploration by considering the possibility that what if there is a true secret organization? And what do I mean by true secret organization? Well, we've looked at these organizations, these fraternal organizations from the past, especially the golden age of fraternalism, and we understand that they are assigned or labeled as being secret. Now, they're not secret if we know about them. We know about the Masons, we know about the Independent Order of Oddfellows, we know about the Knights of Pythias, and we know about many, many others. There's so many it's hard to even list them all, but we're aware of their existence. But I want you to think about the possibility if there is a secret organization that really is secret, that nobody actually knows about. Just really think about this. An organization that actually practices the rule, silence is golden. and does not make itself known to anyone. Now, you have to be very careful here because, yes, there is that old saying about the reality of conspiracies that was stated in Star Trek The Next Generation in the episode named Conspiracy, where one of the admirals that was part of the conspiracy made the following statement. That's the charming thing about conspiracies. When a machination is real, it's never suspected. And when it's not real, it's simply in the realm of the paranoid mind for those who want to believe. And so that's why we have to be careful. It's true that there would be no evidence of a true secret organization, because they would practice silence being golden. Now you're asking the question, well, how exactly would they exist? How exactly would they carry out their will if there was a secret organization? Would it be possible that they were able to actually create other organizations, surface organizations that answered to them? But these organizations are unaware that they actually answer to this true secret organization, that they think that they're being told the truth, but in effect they're actually told another series of half-truths, or at least only the truth they need to know. And maybe that's only 5% of what's really going on. But because of the fact that these surface organizations have been invited to some esoteric information, or at least believe that they're participating in something that's esoteric or unique, that they're willing to enforce it with all of their will. They're willing to believe in it and dedicate their entire lives to what they believe is their own special view to the truth. They have this exclusive view that other people don't have, and as a result of it, they're willing to live true to it. And then the actual true secret organization is simply able to give instructions to these surface groups. And only a very, very few, small number of people actually have greater amounts of the truth. Now, is that possible? Or is that, again, simply in the realm of paranoia? Now, I'm not saying that there's any actual evidence out there that there is a true organization that is secret and that we don't know of its existence. But we think about the fact that there is that questionable existence of unique organizations within the military. Now, of course, we understand that there's a need for that. There's national security concerns, there may be some sort of emergency, there may be some sort of medical emergency. There's always a reason that necessitates extreme measures. And do we really accept those extreme measures? For example, in World War I, there were actually organizations that kept eyes on American citizens. The Knights of Liberty, which was a vigilante organization that existed in World War I. Now, the Knights of Liberty, not to be confused with the earlier Knights of Liberty that was opposed to slavery in the United States in the 1800s, we're talking about the organization from World War I, its entire existence seemed to be focused on being vigilantes. And really, they dressed up in fancy Halloween costumes and used a number of tactics, usually they tarred and feathered people, because they weren't supporting the war effort enough, or oftentimes simply because they had Germanic background. Because remember, in World War I, the enemy was Germany, or at least what Germany was in World War I. Oddly enough, a similar organization never took root in World War II, even though we could make the argument according to the official history that Germany of World War II was a lot more threatening directly to the United States than Germany of World War I. But perhaps we could just attribute that to the change in society. I always find it interesting, though, that it seems that every single group within the United States was always held under suspicions at some point in time, past, present, or future, and even the United States government seemed to keep a watchful eye on these groups. That seems to be counter to what we understand are the basic American values. But maybe that's why we have even foreign media sources, such as The Guardian, trying to tell us exactly how we should think. Of course, they are correct in the fact that Americans oftentimes think where they're directed to. There's a reason why I did not pick any U.S. media sources. I really don't have to. But perhaps the most frightening prospect is if there is a true secret organization, and there was the capacity, the apparatus, and the infrastructure in place. Think about it. If there actually is some sort of table of organization, something that we're not privy to, or maybe it's just all an impressive and colossal farce, something that's just designed to keep our attention and not to allow us to really perceive events as they really are. Perhaps that's all possible at the same time. But you think about the fact that there have been legitimate conspiracies. Now, of course, remember, according to the mainstream, only certified historians and scientists are the ones who can tell us the difference between a legitimate conspiracy and a conspiracy theory. But I'll tell you what I find most interesting about that. That the mainstream, the government, the forces of authority do acknowledge and admit that there have been legitimate conspiracies. And then there are the things that you're not supposed to be thinking, which are conspiracy theories. But what's the difference between the two of them? Is there really an organization out there that does practice silence is golden? I leave it to you. Thank you for joining me. Over 30 years ago, when you wanted to see a film, you had to wait until it aired on the ABC Sunday Night Movie, or you went to the video store. I worked at a video store, and we came across this particular movie called The Exterminator, and we thought that the star was Willem Dafoe, the star from Platoon who played Sergeant Elias, but it was actually Robert Ginny. Yes, the same Robert Ginny from Warrior of the Lost World. We sought films of Willem Dafoe because many people wanted to see him, and this was before his breakthrough roles in Spider-Man and The Boondock Saints. Some of those films included White Sands and others, To Live and Die in L.A. Willem Dafoe, for some reason, comes up a lot on this channel, and I thought now is the opportunity to really go back and do an exploration of the land of origin of Willem Dafoe, that being the state of Wisconsin. Come join me as we explore the marvelous old world of Willem Dafoe. We begin by taking a look at Milwaukee, the brew city of the old world. We've explored Milwaukee before, but we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at it. Now, in the interest of full disclosure to viewers, I do not know Willem Dafoe. I have never worked with Willem Dafoe, and in fact, when I worked at the video store, I actually thought his name was William Dafoe. He went to school at UW Milwaukee. And what's intriguing about Milwaukee is we're informed by the official historical account that it was settled predominantly by Germans in the 1800s, along with virtually all the other cities and towns in the Midwest United States, all at the same time. But there's many interesting accounts with Milwaukee. Indeed, we've explored extensively the Mitchell and the Mackey buildings, which seem to be eclipsed by the more modern buildings, and yet when you look at the modern buildings, you have larger box structures, but you don't tend to have the wonderful artistic work. And yet, of course, we neglect the other older buildings that were much taller. When we look at the old images of Milwaukee, though, in different neighborhoods, we see the signs of much of the old world. And oftentimes this will be in the small detail that they apparently had the time and effort, again going off of the official historical account, to actually construct within their incredible city. Of course, when you look a little bit more closely at the details, you will see that there seems to be a lot of effort. What exactly is that? Is that a fire hydrant, or is that another one of those outhouses? And indeed, when we look at the fire station here, we see a very beautiful and ornate building. Why exactly does a fire station need to be so incredibly ornate? Why do we have to have perfect arches and portal windows? Yes, we'll be explained that the tower is... Wait a minute. Is that another one of those porta-johns? Or is it a fire hydrant? I don't know, I'm confused. Maybe when nature calls. When you look at the images, though, you get the impression that there does seem to be quite a remnant of the old world that was in Milwaukee. And when we explored Milwaukee before, we couldn't help but notice that there really seemed to be many different signs or indicators. Now, of course, we're looking at old images, but whether it's trolleys or these very elaborate and well-constructed old-world buildings. And again, we really have to wonder about the scale of these, because we look at these images and we get different hints. This appears to be the Germania building with the numerous domes in the background, at least that's what they called it. There's also the numerous and very impressive churches of Milwaukee, many with steeples that exceeded 200 feet. And this was a time when such feats were considered to be difficult, although it doesn't seem to have been difficult at all. We've also explored extensively the account of St. Josaphat, another one of those incredible basilicas, from the 1890s and built by the parishioners themselves, immigrants from Poland who apparently were also expert artisans and craftsmen, as they always are, and they could pull off any sort of structure. But the incredible churches behind Milwaukee give us many different accounts. We might expect them to be all German or Polish or Catholic, and yet they show us many incredible structures that defy simple explanation. Now you could say, well, this is a large city and it's off of Lake Michigan, it's a port city, it all makes sense. And yet when we look at different images from different time frames, whether it's the 1880s, the 1890s, we see the same bizarre details. We see the trolleys that are being pulled by horses, because apparently that made a lot of sense back then. You really think about this, why would anybody want to put the horses through this? Unless this was the only option that they really had. Why not just haul around a regular wagon that doesn't weigh so much? And then of course you see it mixed with the other strange signs, such as signs of the town being electrified, and yet more advanced structures. Here we have the old courthouse in Milwaukee. And naturally we see that it's not just a single dome, but multiple domes, including the smaller domes. And it did not survive to reach us to this day. It was something else, a victim that you could say of early urban renewal. Or there's many other accounts for what actually happened to these structures. Oddly enough, the front facade is not easy to see. There's also the impressive account of Milwaukee's train station. Again, another casualty of urban renewal. And yet we have the hints of something far more advanced. And perhaps that's one of the most compelling details that we have when we explore a place like Milwaukee. I wonder if when he was a student in Milwaukee, if Willem Dafoe had the exact same perceptions that we did. I don't exactly know what his real opinion is, and I respect him far too much to actually try to state or use lines of dialogue, although he might make a few appearances later in this exploration. But you do have to wonder if somebody walking through the city notices these things, whoever it is. And it seems as though it was more apparent in the past, when the old world ornate structures were more visible. And of course now we see that they're surrounded by numerous tall commercial buildings and the great skyscrapers of steel and glass. But you look at other images and you still have the impression that there was this sign of the advances of the old world within Milwaukee. What's the true account of Milwaukee? Is it indeed the official historical account that it was a series of immigrants primarily from Germany and Poland? I always find it interesting too how immigrants from the center of Europe ended up right in the center of the United States. You'd figure they would have stayed on the East Coast and then worked their way in. But of course there's numerous explanations, the Homestead Act, free land, and many other things that caused people to push out to the west. Interesting symbols that we see on this building. And here we have our famous cartouche, and yet it looks to be more like a snake figure with a very unhappy face in it. What are your thoughts on this? Let me know in the comments. And we do see this in many of these buildings that are still hidden in the various streets across the city of Milwaukee. That give us the impression that perhaps there are some signs of advancement that don't exactly make a lot of sense. Why would anybody bother with this kind of ornate detail and decoration in these structures, whether this building was really built in the late 1800s or the early 1900s, or what have you? And yet you see similar signs of detailing that serve no functional purpose whatsoever, but yet they were placed in the building. The official response will be, well, back in the past, people simply cared more about art a lot more. And there's no shortage of these incredible buildings that were informed or constructed of granite or some kind of advanced limestone. Of course, Milwaukee is known for being the home of the cream brick, although of course what we're looking at here is certainly not constructed out of any sort of brick now, is it? And yet somehow they could still get very precise columns. You also have other structures such as this, what we might simply call as redstone or made of something else entirely. And it includes one of these more advanced towers, again with multiple portal windows behind it. Now, you could say that this matches some of the architecture in Germany, but it also matches the architecture in many other places. Looking at the City Hall in Milwaukee, we'll be informed that what they decided to do when they built it in the 1890s is put beer steins on it. Of course, are those really supposed to be beer steins, or do they represent other things? Or do beer steins just look like anything and everything? Not really sure. But when you look at the base of the incredible City Hall, you can see that a lot more detail and effort went into its construction. How exactly were these blocks all formed and put into perfect position? Why doesn't anybody build a city hall like this today with this kind of ornamentation and detailing? And the answer will be cost. We just simply don't have the money. We have too many regulations, whether they be safety or environmental regulations. And despite our great advances in technology, despite our implementation of artificial intelligence, we just don't have either the will or the capability to construct such a building today. And yet, looking inside the City Hall, you'll find the very unique layout reminiscent of the great arcades that we've looked at in the past, the shopping arcades. And yet, oddly enough, these series of floors go all the way to the ceiling. A very interesting and advanced interior that one could film a science fiction movie. On the topic of science fiction films, though, we have these original photos of the Milwaukee City Hall in the very early 1900s, and amazing how much it stands out, especially when you notice that the floor, that the road and the surface is all covered with mud. Well, that would make sense. Everything was very muddy, and we had nothing but horses and tracks apparently going around with trolleys. Very intriguing. There's no shortage, though, of these incredible buildings that are across Milwaukee. And here we have the German English Academy. Ah, yes, because people needed to learn to speak English when they came to the United States, and they needed to have special academies to teach them. Interestingly enough, we don't necessarily have special academies, at least not buildings that are built with this kind of detail and ornamentation. So how exactly are we supposed to teach multi-languages to different people if we don't have very ornate and detailed buildings? I mean, are you supposed to do this in a modern commercial building? The other odd thing when you look at some of these structures, though, is it's as though they were expressing many different building forms. And you do see many examples within Milwaukee of these particular structures that we might think would be a little bit more limited, and yet they're still within the main city itself, such as with the Great Arch and the multiple columns, reminiscent of the City Hall that we looked at when we explored St. Louis. And so again, these architectural stylings are in many different cities. This ability to build was not limited to one particular area. We'd almost expect it to be limited to one particular area. Looking at some of the interiors, we also see a lot more of the prime examples of numerous portal windows and the interesting columns that have been integrated within the walls. What was the real function of this structure? Was it simply to have an advanced skylight in the 1800s? And in the many hotels, you'll still find that they're decorated in a way, although there are some points of the current era that have worked their way into the structure, you can still see its original ornate beauty. Now, to be fair, there are efforts by the current era to try to match these kinds of building styles and replicate them to an extent. Although when you go and you explore in person and you actually do a personal assessment of what these structures are constructed of, you'll always find that there is no comparison with the quality of the materials. There's also the fact that these structures are stated to have been around for over 100 years in most cases, and some much older, and they are still standing, enduring perfectly to this day. For example, could anyone do columns like this today? And now we look at the Mackey Building, part of the Two Buildings for One special by our favorite architect E. Townson Mix. This Mackey Building also served as the Chamber of Commerce. We've looked at it in passing before, but a very beautiful and ornate building from the 1870s, of course. And looking at different perspectives of it, we can see that it has a very incredible ornamentation, done after the United States Civil War and during a time of a financial panic. Indeed, the worst financial panic that the United States would see until the Great Depression. In fact, they called this one the Great Depression itself. And yet, looking at the interior, it seems as though there was no expense spared. Even if there were just artisans who were willing to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and required no logistical sustainment, and these materials were all just laying around right next to the building, how much effort would it have been to construct something like this? How much would it have really taken? And here we have the Mitchell Building, which is right next to the Mackey Building, again, also designed by famed architect E. Townson Mix. And let's be clear, these weren't the only two buildings he designed in Milwaukee. In summary, he basically architected half of the old world buildings in Milwaukee, according to official accounts. We've looked at the Mitchell Building before, and here we see it next to the Mackey Building, the 2-for-1 special, or the City for a Deal special that E. Townson Mix provided Milwaukee. And in his spare time, let's not forget that he also designed the state capital of Kansas. And he also designed a county courthouse in the middle of Minnesota because, he was the guy you called whenever you needed something. Well, whatever you want to make of the official historical account, it is quite intriguing, even if it's taken at face value. But yet other structures, whether it's the Pabst Theater here, that give you the impression that there is a lot more ornamentation and detail than we're used to seeing. Why is it that some of these cities have more of this detail than others? And the answer will be, well, some cities embraced urban renewal, other cities, based on politics or based on local flavor, decided to retain or value the historiosity that was present within their city. There's many different explanations given, although it is fair to say that there's not a city that's completely removed the old world or the presence of the old world. Some cities have more than others. And perhaps what I'm fascinated most by with a city such as Milwaukee is that it seems to have retained many of these specific examples of this incredible and amazing old world architecture. And here we see some of the most impressive examples, these columns with the ornamentation and decoration within it. And once again, we see these interesting devices, these symbols. Do they really have a meaning? Why do they come up so often if they don't have any meaning? Was this just in the architect's handbook in the 1800s? And looking at another perspective of the City Hall, we can see that there are other old world buildings around it, that it's not in isolation. And perhaps that's one of the most amazing things about Milwaukee, is that from certain perspectives you can really get the feeling that you're actually back in the distant past, whether it was the 1800s or whatever time you want to think of it as. And we have interesting structures such as this that we've looked at before, and who knows what we might call this now. A bank, a prison. Well, we know prisons are always castles. And from an image that has questionable attributes about it, we notice that there's an extensive power signature. Ah yes, the incredible Pabst Building. And let's not forget that the nickname of Milwaukee, in addition to Cream City, is Brew City. And Pabst and all the other beer brewing companies that are there, because Wisconsin had a reputation for being a drinking state from its inception. Oh, and we've got trolleys going by too. Another one of these advanced looking trains. Now, of course, you could say maybe they just decorated the train and that made total sense, but you also have this impressive train station behind it, with interesting towers and a lot of detail on it. Now let's think about this. If this was some sort of remnant, or for whatever reason a remnant of the previous civilization that managed to survive relatively intact in the reset, then how much of it really was preserved? And maybe that's the way we should be evaluating these cities when we do these explorations. Could it have been possible that there was somebody who came along and was responsible for cataloging and categorizing these buildings? That there was a different sort of taxonomy that was potentially applied? We've seen this design style in many other places, and you can't just attribute this particular design style to an architect such as E. Townson Mix. It's apparent in cities all across the land, and not just in the United States. And yet, of course, we'll state that a building such as this, a mansion or whatever you want to call it, does have a limitation in terms of what architect it's affiliated with. But I show different images in different lighting because, as always, we see that every single genuine old world building has different appearances dependent on the lighting. And that's probably one of the most recurring details that we tend to see when we look at these old world structures. Now, looking at a more visible photo, we can see some of the details that go into this particular structure. Columns and pillars integrated with the wall, pediments above each of the doorways. Why would this be needed? We can only accept the explanation that everybody was rich in the 1800s so many times, and apparently there were rich people everywhere. And we also have other interesting photos from Milwaukee indicating fires, destructions, or buildings that were destroyed. There's different accounts of different things that happened at different times, but yet we always have to ask the question, do the accounts that we have really match what actually happened? Or are they just something that they told us that occurred? We've explored the old soldiers' home in western Milwaukee, right next to the baseball field where the Brewers play in the past. And here in this image, we know what this is. It's a compound. Or on this channel, something that we've assessed to be a reset compound. And indeed, I explored this in one of the very early explorations of the channel. There are many incredible, impressive churches in Milwaukee, but I thought that before we left the city where Willem Dafoe was educated in, that we would take a look at one specific church that we haven't looked at just yet. One that stands out and unfortunately has a familiar story. The Trinity Evangelical Lutheran Church, built in 1878. And much like with many other structures, whether it's a state capitol or other churches, this is the third building built in this exact location. Or was it one building built in 3 different locations?
Why don't you let me do the thinking, huh, genius?
Whatever the situation is with it, if it is in the same location, and they inform us that there were earlier buildings that were just as ornate that were built in the same location, and we accept that, it makes it much more difficult to understand exactly what was going on. Because if this is the official historical account, then we're not just saying that we built one incredible church in the 1870s, but prior to that we built 2 incredible churches in a very short amount of time, shortly after the area was recently settled. And yet it has this signature of this very impressive infrastructure. And you might be asking, well, what exactly is that infrastructure? Well, it's all the trolley tracks that you see, it's all the train tracks. And look at this, another one of these very incredible oration stands that we have, or the pulpit, whatever you want to call it in church. What exactly is that? Is that some sort of transporter device from Star Trek? That is very, very advanced for this impressive church. And we can see that there are many details about it, and there was even the time that it had its original bells. And we always pay attention to the sound and frequency that the bells of these churches could potentially provide. And perhaps this is exactly something that we're looking for and paying attention to, because that's what we have with all these churches. And of course it has the very impressive and ornate organ. What an incredible piece of, do you want to call it technology? Do you want to call it equipment? Do you want to call it an essential portion of the building? We have many different theories for why we have these things that are called organs, and yet here we do seem to get that impression of technology. Look at these old photos though, and what strikes me is that even in the oldest ones from the 1890s is how old the building already looks, even though it would only be 10, 20, a maximum of 30 years old. Now you could say perhaps that's just the effect of the monochromatic photo, and maybe that's true. But then you compare and contrast it with colorized photos, and you see many of the same signs. How old is it really? Where did the stones and the blocks and the bricks actually come from? What time frame were they really constructed or formed? And looking in the interior, we do see that there's other examples of very impressive architecture and artwork, whether it's the colored windows or the main altar itself, in addition to all the impressive columns and each of the unique colors on the exterior, mixing with the interior to form a structure that's an impressive work of art. And I'm still unbelievably impressed by this incredible organ that they had in this church. It's not just the fact that these organs are impressive in terms of their capability to produce sounds, or very specific sounds at very impressive or very specific frequencies, but also just the look of them. It's like it's a small structure itself. And even seeing some of the detailing and decoration on the ceiling that I missed in earlier images, it's impressive how this church was really laid out and what it really could have represented. Just think about this, if there were structures like this all over the land, serving perhaps a different purpose, no doubt people congregating in them. But we see other details in this church, and we see that it appears that blocks have been added at a later time, almost as though they were trying to make sure that they cataloged the official historical account. And maybe that is indeed what happened, but that does not look like one of the original blocks or bricks of this church. And this does not certainly look like an original cornerstone showing the architect's name. It appears to be something that was added later. I could be wrong. I'm only giving my impression looking at images, but it is rather odd how much it stands out. I mean, it could be that that's how they wanted to recognize the architect. And look at this. One of the most interesting and impressive radiator layouts that I've ever seen. And of course, if you recall back to our explorations of the Iowa State Capitol, I shared that that particular state capitol maintained a perfect equilibrium of temperature regardless of the hottest days in summer and the coldest days in winter. I'm sure this radiator may have served the same purpose. So, does this church continue to survive in all of its glory today? Can you visit it right now and still see it in its impressive preserved state of old world glory? Oh, yes, of course, we have three-dimensional crosses on it, because why not? What could have happened to this church?
There was a fire!
Ah, yes, of course. Again, another unfortunate tragedy that we have. The random, isolated, and yet specific location fires that can strike certain buildings. Very, very odd that this church managed to endure for over 100 years, and then finally it was struck by a fire in this particular century, but perhaps we could simply attribute it to misfortune. There's always any number of causes for a church fire. Random lightning, or some other strange electrical malfunction occurring, or any other slew of causes. And the tragic reality is that this incredible edifice was struck down by this fire. That the fire deprived us of the opportunity to really experience it in all of its glory. Because it's very clear that the roof in the interior was gutted. I'm not even going to bother posing any questions about how fire could actually burn down a legitimate structure like this. But I suppose you could say it has a little bit of a happy ending. The community rallied and they managed to raise funds for a restoration construction. Much like a very famous church that we recently heard about over in Paris, in France. And we had this same story here for this particular church, despite this level of destruction. And you can see that, unfortunately, the very impressive interior that we looked at in the previous images is no more. It has been destroyed by this fire. But no need to concern yourself. The restoration efforts have brought the building back. And you can see that while it may not quite be its former glory, at least the structure still stands, and you can see something that somewhat resembles what it used to be. And I certainly don't want anybody to think that I'm denigrating the efforts that went into this restoration, and certainly it took maximum effort to achieve this. I guess it's sad, though, that we don't have the same organ, but I guess at least they have an organ. There's also Holy Hill, built 1926 to 1931. This is northwest of Milwaukee, near the town of Hubertus, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and there's a nice little restaurant close to it called Fox and the Hound. A very impressive structure, built in the late 1920s and the early 1930s during the Great Depression. That's really out in the rural area. Now, from the very towers and from the ridgeline, you can actually see the Milwaukee skyline from this particular location. I'm showing different images because I did explore this on site, and this is another one of those very amazing locations. Now, according to the official historical account, we're informed that Jesuit missionaries actually explored this hill and designated it as a holy place. And there it endured as a holy place for hundreds of years, until finally they decided to just build a basilica on it, of course in the 1920s and the early 1930s, and finished it during the Great Depression, no less. And yet this structure is visible from nearly 10 miles away. It is very prominent upon the hill, and like many other bona fide old world structures, we see that it has many different color appearances depending on the light. Now, yes, I know you'll say that applies to any other building. That's true, but for whatever reason, it appears to be a lot more apparent and a lot more striking when it's an old world building. There's also the fact that there's no shortage of incredible artistic images and even more recent photographs that show the different perspectives and glory behind this building. And the fact that you can see it driving to it when you're 10 miles away. and as you get closer, it rises and fills the entire skyline. In many ways, it reminds me of other old world structures, such as the Iowa State Capitol, which is built on a very prominent hill. And so I have to ask, what was the original intention behind this structure? Did it have the same intention as the Trinity Lutheran Church that we just looked at? Or did it have some other kind of intention? We have these two towers that are on top of a hill. Perhaps this could have been some implement of a larger technological apparatus. Or it could be that the mainstream historical account is correct, but as I've stated many times in the past, the more I explore and the more I look at examples like this, I find it very hard to explain a structure like this in the middle of the countryside in Wisconsin in the 1920s. And now we go to the great city of Madison, the capital of Wisconsin. And of course, another one of these very impressive state capitals, and Wisconsin has its own beauty. It should be noted, of course, that much like the church, it is not, of course, the first state capital. There have been many state capitals in Wisconsin, and indeed the location of the first state capital in Wisconsin wasn't even in Wisconsin. It was in Burlington, Iowa. Burlington, Iowa, which also served as the territorial capital as Iowa until they moved it to Iowa City and then Des Moines. And here we look at Bascom Hill, an early image of the main buildings of the University of Wisconsin. Very impressive. And yet, how is it they managed to achieve this? This image is purported to have been from the 1860s, although who knows for sure, because we can only go off of the date that they give us. But yet it seems to give the impression of the layout that this University of Wisconsin was there for quite some time. And when they initially built it, they built it in a very impressive fashion. The other interesting thing about the city of Madison, Wisconsin, is that the capital and the surrounding downtown is on an isthmus. It's a very rare occurrence, and we're not talking about an isthmus such as Panama. We're talking about a very narrow isthmus that's between two lakes. And yet it shows the same kind of impressive layout. We also see that in some of the early drawings or renderings of Bascom Hill that there were other structures that of course had domes, as though building domes and towers was clearly no challenge during that particular time frame, whether we're talking about the mid-1800s or it seems to have gone all the way through to 1930. Then the Great Depression happened, then World War II happened, and it seemed as though there were challenges in being able to erect structures like this very quickly. Or who knows, maybe actually establishing the highway system and then the subsequent interstate system in the United States for some reason diminished the capability to build structures like this. Maybe you really just need horsepower and human power, and that's how you build these incredible ornate structures. Of course, you look at some of these other early images of Madison, and they do once again paint a conflicting picture. Again, how accurate are these images? What exactly are they really showing us? And of course, here looking at Bascom Hall on Bascom Hill, we see its original dome. And it looks like we've got Waldo in the front here in this picture. So again, there's signs that this picture has been altered. But that's always an assumption we need to make for many of these old pictures. The point I want to get at with Bascom Hall is that unfortunately it was struck by yet another fire. And because of the fire, it lost its very incredible ornate dome. Again, a recurring theme. And again, they had to renovate it, no doubt. They had to renovate the interior. The building survives today, but it doesn't have its dome. Still on the same hill, though. And how often do we encounter this phenomenon? Why is it that this particular situation occurs so often? We're not even talking about massive city fires here. We're talking about specific location fires. Well, moving on past that, you can see the layout of the Capitol in the very center of the city of Madison. And there is an ordinance in effect that says that no other structure can be built taller than the state Capitol. Although, even if there was, you'd see that there's really no way that attention could be taken away from this impressive state Capitol. We do have construction photos of it, and remember that this is just one in a long line of state capitals, many of which were, of course, built during the 1800s because, as we established, it was easier to build things before the highway system was around. And of course we have the cranes on the dome, much like we see in other locations. Now, whether we're looking at a library or whatever the original intention behind this particular structure was, again, we see the same layout that we'll see in any courthouse in any random county across the land. Many different columns and, of course, ornamentation above the windows. And looking at early drawings or renderings of Madison, it does again seem to give the impression that there was already quite many extensive structures that were already erected there. So what's really the account? What's really the purpose behind some of these drawn images? Why don't we actually have photographs? Well, the answer will be photography wasn't invented yet when they initially settled the area. This was the 1830s. Well, they had photography. Here we have a boathouse and the gymnasium, also known as the armory. Ah, yes, just the kind of things that you need in a gymnasium and a boathouse, which are turrets and a castle appearance. Everything needs to look like a castle. And here again, we have another one of these very impressive structures with what looks to be one of these fairy tale towers. Although you could almost say that this is a bell tower on this particular structure. Ah, the College of Law, University of Wisconsin in Madison, Wisconsin. But think about this with all these different accounts. How many buildings like this did they have where they had these impressive domes and these bell towers and all these other ornate detailings with their construction? How exactly did they pull it off if the official historical account is true? Maybe the most disturbing thing is if the official historical account is true, then that shows that we have lost tremendous capabilities over time. Is it all really due to the fact that we just simply don't have any money? Although we don't seem to mind constantly going further in debt, and we know that not a single conflict has ever been prevented because of a lack of funds, has it? But you look at all these different structures and how they're laid out, even with just the university or the downtown in Madison. And you have to ask, how exactly were they able to construct all these in a short amount of time? Because every city and every university across the United States has a similar story and a similar, very constrained construction timeline. And you can still walk the buildings of the University of Wisconsin to this day. You can still walk across the downtown, and you'll see all these very impressive, dramatic examples. I'm not sure. It gives me the impression that there were something, or there were examples. And here we see the construction photo of that particular structure. Although, is that what's really going on? It's where you really have to ponder the question, though. You really have to think about it, how they would have gone about laying out all these structures if the mainstream official historical account is correct. How did they build this armory, and why would they build this as an armory like a castle? Shouldn't it have already been obsolete? As someone told me in the Civil War explorations, they had cannons, and all the cannons fired exploding cannonballs. Well, if all the cannons were firing exploding cannonballs, then what was the point of putting all this effort in these fixed fortifications? And looking at this early map of Madison, the other question has to be asked, why would someone get the idea to lay out their state capital in an isthmus? How difficult would that be? Or unless you're going to say, I'm bringing the construction materials across the lakes, and that's how we're going to do it. It should also be noted that the state fairgrounds in Wisconsin is not located in Madison. And I'm simply calling attention to that because usually we tend to see state fairgrounds that are located in the state capital. Although there are accounts of different locations that the state fair was in Wisconsin and other states, I just find it interesting. It's actually located in West Allis, Wisconsin. And oddly enough, West Allis is also known for this very incredible factory complex. Now, when exactly this was constructed, what are the details behind it? A little bit beyond the purview of this particular exploration. But there's no shortage of photographs that show impressive, colossal pieces of equipment that were being used. And keep in mind, this was before the advent of large-scale heavy machinery, although we clearly see large-scale heavy machinery. So what's the true account of it? And what is the actual origin of the state fair parks? Because oftentimes we do see more advanced buildings. Here we go, Wisconsin State Fair, September 12th to 17th, 1892. And then when you're done, you can go south and wait for the Chicago World's Fair. It's not that far away. But going back to Madison, you look in the interior of some of these impressive libraries, and of course you can see that you have your very beautiful ceiling and your columns and pillars and all the other decorations that are essential if you're actually going to go in there and read and recall exactly what you've read, because you're doing it in a very comfortable environment. But to this day, you can walk around the University of Wisconsin, and yet some of the people that I talked to around there gave me a very interesting account that about 3 to 4 years ago, it wasn't exactly the most enjoyable place to be. I'm not exactly sure why this was. They just said it was a very difficult time. But moving on past that, though, you can still see the incredible stairways and the fact that every single one of these buildings really seems to be laid out on the terrain perfectly. Now, of course, the explanation will be, it's just another university, it's just another college. And, of course, they always seem to have the resources and the capability to build incredible structures like this. Oh, yes. Gymnasium, armory. You need to have many turrets, you need to have many towers, because apparently they were originally going to defend the structure from all those mighty exploding cannonballs that they had. And we know they must have had exploding cannonballs in the Civil War, because we have photos that show that the cities were destroyed. Of course, we're under the understanding that those cities were destroyed by fire. But what exactly is the origin of an armory building such as this? This is in the United States. This is in Wisconsin, in Madison. Who was thinking to build something like this, and why? And of course, you have your campanile or your bell tower, the portal window, constructed sometime 1920 to 1930, or so the official account says. Naturally, it would not be after World War II because, again, with the advent of the highway system and the interstate system, the ability to rapidly construct these structures seemed to diminish. Now, we can certainly suggest reasons for this, but the official explanation will be more regulations, more safety standards, less money, and then apparently just less of a will to do it. I mean, why would anybody want or need to build a house like this? I don't know. Maybe because if you actually go in a house like this, you don't hear a thing outside. And Madison also has its own share of brewery companies. We looked at many different ones in the original exploration of Milwaukee. And oddly enough, these breweries look like castles themselves, because you just can't get enough castles. Interesting how in all these photos, and even in the drawn or artistic pictures, they always have Old Glory flying over them. Well, you always need to have your flag flying over your structure. Just like Robert Redford said in the film The Last Castle, make sure you fly your flag. Ironic that he said that. Although in this particular photograph, they don't have a flag on the pole. How about that? But the brewery's still there. So what's the real account behind Madison? Was it really settled and rapidly populated, as the official historical account says, from the mid-1800s and then grew up rapidly? Another question is, why wasn't the capital of Wisconsin located elsewhere, such as, I don't know, Janesville, which is a town that they had settled before Madison, and yet didn't grow up quite like Madison did, for whatever reason, although it should be noted that Abraham Lincoln stayed there. And here we have one of the earlier state capitals. And of course, you might detect a tone of incredulity in my voice, and I don't know, there's just something that's a little off with some of these images. Whether it's the first state capital, the second state capital, and let's not confuse it because there were also territorial capitals that preceded these state capitals. This was the second one, and you can see that it's no slouch either. They've got a very impressive dome and many columns and pillars, and we're informed that they constructed wings. And of course, this particular state capital went up in smoke too, because how else would it be? You know, fires just started all the time. You know, it's not just in the 21st century when you have churches catching on fire. Back in the 1900s, the early 1900s, you had state capitals catching on fire. And so newer and more impressive state capitals needed to be built. And it was very easy to do so. And that's why we have this particular beauty today. And I haven't exactly been inside of this particular state capital as much as I would have liked, but I do find the entire layout of Madison quite impressive. I also find some of the conflicting accounts with the history of Madison, yes, the official history, quite intriguing as well. There's also many lost structures from Madison that don't exactly add up with our official historic account. Here we have another one of these very impressive boathouses, Now look, I understand it's an isthmus and it's an impressive city. You need to build the nicest boathouses. Of course, this one didn't survive to reach us to this day. Or any number of these very impressive and well-decorated hotels. If only we had a hotel like this. Well, it should be noted that there are some of these older buildings, these old world buildings that have survived and have been converted into hotels. And in my humble estimation, they tend to be some of the nicest hotels you can stay in. Much like if you find a bed and breakfast that's a bona fide old world home. And then you have other structures such as this, and what was their original purpose, and why would something need to be this ornately detailed on what they euphemistically call the facade out on the front of it, with the different arches. And yet we'll end looking at Madison by seeing that they once had another one of these very impressive standpipe water towers. So you can see that St. Louis was not the only city in the United States, or Louisville for that fact, that had these very beautiful and ornate standpipe water towers. That's how you're going to store water, I guess, in the 1800s. And now we go to Appleton, Wisconsin, the hometown of Willem Dafoe, also where Harry Houdini resided. Oh, and I think Joe McCarthy resided there as well, but I'm not going to look that one up. Anyways, they have a nice history museum that is, of course, a castle. Yes, because I guess you just can't get enough castles. So did they build the history museum to be a castle, or did they find a castle and convert it in the history museum? And this is certainly something that I have tabbed for an on-site exploration, because it's very, very odd that they're usually so direct in having the history museum be a castle. Of course, I'm speaking in total sarcasm if you can't pick up on that. And here we have the Fox River Paper Company. Another one of these very astounding and stupendous complexes that endures to this day. Now, we have to ask the question about the way industry functioned as well in the 1800s, because, again, it seemed as though they were able to rapidly construct very impressive large compounds with smokestacks, towers, and everything else. Now, really, is that how you're going to build some of your factories or a mill with very beautiful ornamentation on it as well? This does seem to be a little bit excessive, and there's also the fact of the immense size of this particular compound. And then there's the numerous impressive bridges that run into Appleton. And I have to wonder if young Willem Dafoe, when he was going around here in this town, ever had any idea of what he was really looking at. I mean, I'll admit I certainly didn't have any idea of what I was looking at when I was going around my hometown growing up, and yet there were many examples of architecture such as this, or this John Street Bridge that is so very impressive. When exactly was it constructed, and how were they able to do it so easily? Now, you'd say, well, how are you assuming that they did it so easily? Simple, because of the fact that it was done so often, much like with all these other buildings that were constructed in a small period of time. Here we have the Lawrence Memorial Chapel. And yet, for some reason, this almost seems like a structure you would expect to see in the Deep South in the United States. But we're not in the Deep South. We're in Wisconsin. And you might see an example of another one of the cartouches right here in the middle. So again, many of the same architectural stylings and many of the same symbols. And of course, what would a city or town be without an asylum of some sort? And of course, Appleton had its own asylum. It did not survive to this particular day, but you can see that it has all the details that an asylum would need from the 1800s. The very tall tower, and of course the large wings and the many floors. Of course, much like many other cities that we've looked at in Wisconsin, you can see that Appleton has another bell tower here on the corner of the building. You actually see this in a lot of the towns in Wisconsin, no matter how small they may be. And then looking at the original map of Appleton and these bird's eye view maps, and we've examined these in detail before. Are they really giving us a true picture of what was actually going on? Or is it merely just an artistic representation? Now, some other explorers have suggested that the whole point behind the bird's eye view maps was simply about planning a land grab. That they were doing basically a reconnaissance from the air, although how exactly they were doing that in the 1800s is topic for debate. But they gave you an idea of what the layout of the particular city was. Ah, yes, and Appleton had its own armory right next to the Presbyterian Church. Apparently, this armory didn't survive to become a gymnasium like the one in Madison did, but Again, another city with an armory that's a castle, and another very impressive church, because why not? And so when you start to look around, you get an idea of just how advanced and how many examples of old world architecture we have. For example, one of these old pools. Now, you don't see pools like this so much anymore, but apparently they used to be a lot more common. I've wondered, were these circular pools actually from our current civilization, or were they from the earlier civilization? And looking even closer here at the paper company, you get the idea, though, that there was a lot more that went into the construction of this particular building at a time during the distant past. And of course, people will tell you that there was quite an odoriferous odor that accompanied being around this paper company, as there usually is that's around any other company or production mill or, dare I say, meat rendering plant. Oh, here we have a couple smokestacks on this. So what was the real origin behind this particular complex? Was this something that our civilization built, or was it someone else? Why on earth did they decide to build an armory in Appleton, Wisconsin? Did they know there were going to be all kinds of troubles, certain uprisings? And again, we see another example of a very beautiful and well-detailed church. And who's exactly building churches like this today? Well, there's some efforts. You can find an example in La Crosse, although in my humble estimation, Our Lady of Guadalupe, if I'm saying that correctly, just doesn't match any of these churches that we've looked at in this exploration, or any of the other actual old world churches. Of course, it was built in the 2000s, and they had the advantages of the modern interstate and the highway. Oh, and they weren't building all these structures at the exact same time like they were in the 1800s, but for whatever reason, it just didn't compare. And what would be a town without the castle schools that we've oftentimes looked at? Ah, Lincoln School. What is it with calling all these old world schools Lincoln School? Did they name everything Lincoln this and Lincoln that? I mean, I understand he was officially the greatest president in the United States. I guess maybe I would just expect to see more Roosevelts. Well, who am I kidding? There are actually a lot of schools named Roosevelt across the United States. The famous figures of history who never made mistakes and never committed any failed policies. Let's remember that. And here we have some images of this beautiful old world building before they tore it down in Appleton. And yet we can see the same detailings and architecture that we've seen in the other structures, many of which that survive in Milwaukee and Madison and the other cities across Wisconsin. And the interior, of course, with no shortage of radiators. I think about that when I was growing up in school. I recall how effective the radiators really were, but for whatever reason we went away from them. Again, the official explanation will be because of safety, regulations, and because of the fact that we needed to be more efficient with energy. And now we go to Green Bay, the Brown County Courthouse. And you know what Green Bay is famous for? It's the home of the Green Bay Packers, the NFL football team. And indeed, even on the official historical marker, or the plaque that goes along with this particular courthouse, they even talk about its initial history as being part of the formation of the Green Bay Packers. Yes, I don't know. Maybe they just need to change the name of the city to Green Bay Packerville or something to that effect. And yes, that's what the plaque actually tells you. Nothing about this very impressive structure, just that it opened up in the early 1900s and that it was involved in the early history of the Green Bay Packer football team. Well, looking past NFL football, which I don't have anything against, it's just interesting that that's what they're throwing in our faces and that's what the city's known for, we can see, looking up in the tower, or the inside dome, whatever you want to call it, of this impressive courthouse, some unique artwork. And indeed, there's also the other details that we have in this county courthouse, with very incredible columns made out of the more advanced, what will be informed as marble, but again, I often don't posit if these are much more advanced materials, created by some advanced process that's been lost to time. And indeed, the exterior of this courthouse is holding up extremely well to this day. Look at some of these spheres and the details in the architecture here. And when you look a little bit more closely, you might notice that we have, again, some of the same symbols that we've seen in many other locations across the land. Again, there it is, the cartouche. What exactly does it mean? Was there originally something on it? Was there an angry face, or was it supposed to be blank? What exactly do those represent? And again, it's another very impressive courthouse. And I think when we looked at the Polk County Courthouse in Des Moines, Iowa, how it compares and contrasts with this courthouse, we do get the impression of much more advanced building capability. And again, I have to ask the question if one can take photographs within this courthouse. Probably not, but at least somebody could. Again, what exactly do these images have to do with representing justice in Green Bay, Wisconsin in 1900? Or why don't we have a bunch of football players painted up there? You know, the Green Bay Packers. I mean, that's what the city's known for. Being a little facetious, but it should be noted that Green Bay is officially the oldest town in Wisconsin, first settled. At least that's what the official history says. But what's the real account behind this incredible courthouse? And this is definitely one of the greatest beauties, and we've seen some incredible ones as we've done our explorations on this channel. And again, we can see the different coloration within the foundation stones, the walls, the columns, the pillars, and even some of the decoration that remains to this day on the pediment. And of course a tower, which is what now contains a flagpole. And what would it be without looking at the football stadium? Of course, this is not Lambeau Field, but this is the football field that preceded Lambeau Field, when the Packers played from the 1920s to the mid-1950s. Oddly enough, it's right next to another complex, another compound with a smokestack. What are the odds? And of course, that's exactly what this entire city is known for, and indeed, the entire state of Wisconsin flocks to this particular town to this day to watch the Green Bay Packers play. And the grand tradition of American football, which oddly enough did not exist at all according to the official historical account in the 1800s. But it's really big in the 1900s and onward, so as I'm fond of saying, make of it what you will. There's many other structures in Green Bay that reflect the more advanced architecture and some intriguing details within them. But again, was this really the oldest city in Wisconsin? Was this really settled by fur traders in the distant past? And here we have an older image of the City Hall in Green Bay, because it's not enough to have a very impressive courthouse for the county. You also need to have a very impressive and detailed City Hall for Green Bay. And isn't that an interesting tower? I've never quite seen anything exactly like that. More variations on the architectural style. And let's take a look at this old lighthouse. Longtail Point. Is that exactly what this is, an old lighthouse? Very interesting structure. I'm reminded of the water tower that we examined in Whitewater, Wisconsin. A water tower that has many strange legends associated with it. Is that exactly what we're looking at here? Is this originally the remnants of a lighthouse? Or could it be possible that this is the remnant of some other structure? And maybe that's all it is, but whenever you come across brick structures like this, or the remnants of bricks, especially in the United States, it has a way of getting your attention. And one other thing that Wisconsin is known for is these random monadnocks, as they call them. Yes, these strange outcroppings of rock that just seem to be in very random locations. Now, what makes this even more intriguing is not just going around and finding what remains of these today, and actually you can see many of these today as you go in state parks across Wisconsin. You might recall our Castle Rock exploration in the very origin days of this channel, where we looked at the Castle Rock Formation. But you'll find that many of these rock formations still exist in random locations in Wisconsin. And I wonder if a young Willem Dafoe ever came across them and asked the same questions that we do right now. And Castle Rock here, just this outcropping of rock. Is this really a natural formation? Well, we'll be assured that it is by many different officials and geologists and historians and scientists. But why does it seem like it gives us more of an impression that perhaps it could be something else? Indeed, such as this one here near Madison, Wisconsin that we just looked at. So you can see that these are all over the state. And why did they put the effort into photographing these in the distant past? Oh yes, we even hang flags on these natural towers too. Of course it says it, natural tower. Ah, Devil's Chimney, Mount Vernon, Wisconsin. Yet another one. And yet another very old photograph of it. What's really the story behind photographing these monadnocks? I mean, I can understand people wanted to do natural photography, but was there some sort of reason that these were well documented and well cataloged at the time? Rock Dodgeville, Wisconsin, or did they change the name on this one? Not really sure, because remember what we talked about? Wow, look at the size of this one. You can see those 4 people standing right there. Isn't this a very impressive structure? I'm sure it's completely natural because there's trees on top of it. You wouldn't have trees on top of something that wasn't natural, right? And then, of course, another Castle Rock on the Wisconsin River. So what's really the account behind these particular structures? What's really the account of Wisconsin as a whole? There are many mysteries within this state. And oftentimes it does get overlooked, and even by myself, because I recall that in the origin days of the channel, we looked at many of these mysteries, and then we moved on. Greetings, channel members, and it's great to see everybody again, and I've been waiting to cover this topic for quite some time, and given the fact that the channel's, how shall we say, waded into some uncertain waters over the last couple months, I thought now would be the opportune time to do it. And let me extend a greeting to everybody who's there. Kathy, good to see you. Hey, Michael Walker, Michael Blythe. And who else do we have? Hey, Leo, good to see you. And I'm sure everybody else will check in as they come on in. So why are we talking about the Black Knight? What is the significance of the Black Knight? And why am I suggesting that it may be an old world device? Well, if you're not familiar with the classic conspiracy theory, hey, Leo, then let me regale it to you right now. So the classic conspiracy theory is that the Black Knight is an alien device that is actually in orbit around the planet. Now, by alien, of course, they're suggesting extraterrestrial, and I'm always open-minded to extraterrestrials. You may recall that we did an exploration on UFOs, or unidentified flying objects. Hey, look at that. This is working again. That's awesome. Yes, Leo. Old world satellite. That's actually what I'm suggesting it is. That's my theory. But the original conspiracy theory said that it was some other device, and that the original contact actually goes all the way back to Nikola Tesla. That is the origin of this theory. Now, of course, we know how the mainstream operates. They don't like certain disclosures, and they don't like people talking about certain things. Hey, Clara, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. And so what they do is they just simply categorize it as the blanket term of conspiracy theory. It's merely a conspiracy theory. People who are thinking about things that they shouldn't be thinking. I mean, people who are thinking things they shouldn't be thinking, and they're drawing all sorts of connections. So it all goes back to Nikola Tesla. Now, Kathy's no doubt right, and I'm just merely talking about the origin of the theory that everybody's familiar with. But there are rumors that Tesla actually picked up signals from one of his experimental stations, which is pictured here. Now, whatever the veracity of this account or this historical tale or even this conspiracy theory, it certainly leaves a lot to the imagination. However, there's no doubt that somebody, whether that was Nikola Tesla or simply Nikola Tesla being the person who was given credit, much like the lady who was given all the credit in the Chernobyl miniseries for the work of many scientists. Isn't it funny that they actually had that in that miniseries? Yes, you might recall Emily Watson portrayed the character who was not a historical character, but represented a compilation of many different scientists who helped Legasov in the Chernobyl miniseries. And so what I'm suggesting here is, what if Nikola Tesla is merely similar to that scientist portrayed by Emily Watson in the Chernobyl miniseries? And if you didn't see it, I certainly suggest watching it, because if you consider the timing of the Chernobyl miniseries, 2019, exactly about 1 year before some peculiar events occurred, it becomes a lot more questionable. And Michael refers to Wardenclyffe. Yes, that's the well-known one. Apparently, there were many experimental stations that were out and about. And it was one of these experimental stations that Tesla is attributed to have claimed that he received signals of an unknown origin. And so, again, whether Tesla was a real individual or merely the placeholder for the accomplishments of other individuals, or perhaps he was the go-to person for the reverse engineering of the old world, or, again, attributed credit for it. We'll never really know. It's the ideas, though, that we have to keep our minds open to. And so, hey, Robert, good to see you. And so, if there really was somebody, and it seems clear that there were many people that were working on reverse engineering the old world, salvaging the technology, at least from our concept of theory, then it seems very clear that somebody, no doubt, had a station, or they had merely reactivated old world technology, and they had managed to receive signals. Now, this is actually alluded to by the mainstream in many different ways. You may recall my favorite scientist, Carl Sagan, when he did Cosmos, talked about the so-called Encyclopedia Galactica. Now, just imagine, Tesla is known to have experimented in wireless signals. How long did we really have wireless signals? What's the actual origin? And here's where I'm with Kathy completely. It's definitely older than Tesla. Clearly, they seem to have been meddling with some old technology that they had rediscovered, and therefore they had received signals. Now, what was the origin of these signals? What's actually the reality behind this Black Knight device that may be in orbit? Or do we really want to think of it as being in orbit? Or is it just simply something that's actually up there in the sky? And for that fact, what really is in the sky that we don't really know about? Michael, Colorado Springs was a secret city powered up wirelessly through his new tech that was supposedly free. Yes, and there's a lot of interesting connections with Colorado Springs too, Michael. And let's not forget that Dr. Quinn is associated with it. And that is, again, no coincidence. So once again, mainstream connections that are giving us hints about what may actually be going on. Now, of course, the way that the conspiracy theory, hey, Carl, good to see ya. It's been a while. I always appreciate hearing from you. Well, what the mainstream actually tries to tell us and really tries to convince us is that it's merely a conspiracy theory. And any of the images that we have, and we'll take a look at them, that's merely space junk. Although we won't even talk about the problematic details of any imagery from space. But what exactly is the nature of space? Well, that's a discussion for another time. Where am I approaching the Black Knight device? I'm approaching it from the theory that there really are devices that may still be floating around up there that once in a while we can see if we look to the sky. What's the actual altitude and what's the true nature of them? Not really sure. But what you're seeing here in this image, looks very authentic, doesn't it? Is the concept that all this is merely a thermal shroud because, you know, with all the things that are being blasted off into space, we have NASA providing us wonderful imagery and simply telling us it's a thermal shroud because, you know, we've got nothing better to take images of when we go to space aside from our own debris. So therefore, we very vigorously photograph and video our own debris. Yes. And if you want to accept that, be my guest. Of course, you can probably guess that I'm not one to accept such things. And I actually think that there's a much more complicated explanation behind this. And in fact, I believe that the incipience of the Black Knight theory actually ties into the origin of the salvage theories that we have for the old world technology that we're constantly studying. And Nana says it really well. Yeah, there's a lot of good lore, and maybe that's the best way to say it. It really is a lot of lore with the Black Knight in terms of what's actually up there. Does it actually operate as some kind of relay system for perhaps what Carl Sagan called the Encyclopedia Galactica? It's not an alien internet. It's merely an internet or perhaps a wireless data storage system from a previous civilization. And is it even possible that perhaps that's what interfaces with our concept of the looking glass or our actual concept of AI? The theory goes to many different dark directions. And it's kind of interesting how a lot of elements of the theory have been lost over time. Polly, yeah. Monolith, the 2001. And, you know, if you've read 2001 by Arthur C. Clarke, the monolith actually functions in the same way. It's an advanced device that functions as a relayer, and it receives instructions from a much more advanced intelligence. And so the ideas are all there. They've always been there. But it's the credibility behind these ideas overlapping into a theory. And I think that's probably the most compelling concept of the Black Knight theory as an old world device. Well, here you go, James. I feel that it's an actual sentinel and its job is to control certain areas, hold a different orbit than normal satellites. Well, and you know, that's a good point, James. And what exactly are satellites? Are they what we're informed they are, or are they something completely different? I mean, from my previous experiences, here's what I can personally verify for you. I have flown at 60,000 feet. I have never actually seen anything, though, beyond that little interesting orb I saw in the sky. And I've had other close, trusted friends and observers who've reported seeing things in the sky. In fact, even my own mother reported seeing an interesting object that hovered near her car and then flew off when she was driving home from class. And my mother was certainly not a person who was given to wild fantasies. She was very much a by the numbers person. So, anyways, yeah, something completely different. And that's a great way to describe it, Kathy. And that's kind of what the Black Knight really gives us, this whole concept. We're conditioned, or maybe I should just say, we are guided to think that all it is just simply space junk. And even in the theory, if it actually is some sort of device, well, then it's some kind of extraterrestrial device. So when we're entertaining the conspiracy theorists, you ufologists, yes, we'll entertain that it's some sort of extraterrestrial device. But the last thing you're supposed to think, the last thing you're even supposed to consider, is that it could be some device from a previous highly advanced human civilization. Because the most advanced human civilizations in the past ever got, well, when you go and look at the ruins in the Middle East, those are the most advanced human civilizations. You're certainly not supposed to think in that manner. Charles, as a person who has seen a light doing odd things in the sky, no one believes you. It's a weird experience and no one quite understands it. Yeah, well, you know what? I think any time that we frame experiences, and let's really say what the truth is. And the truth is, we are guided in how we frame our experiences. So if you see a bright flashing light, you are already guided in terms of what you're supposed to think it is. It's some sort of craft. It's an unidentified flying object. It's a test plane, or it's an extraterrestrial. And those are really the only two things you're supposed to think. You're certainly not supposed to think anything beyond that. Well, and you know, Kathy, perhaps we've never been to space as we understand it. But is there another, how shall we say, reality that we could access that nobody talks about that might function in terms of having, well, more of a access to a physical reality that we just don't understand? I mean, certainly it's very, very difficult to defend the concept of space as it's been presented to us because, you know, the whole problem of, well, we never really go there. We never bother to go back there. We lost the technology, or rather, we don't have the capability to replicate the technology. And the problems go on and on. It's a very good point, though. But what's the reality behind it? Yeah, and is it an ice wall? Is it some sort of portal that we can access? Is it even a frame of existence in our minds? I think all are credible possibilities. And what exactly is the shape of the land? I mean, if you just think about it, look down a long hallway, and what do your eyes show you? Will all the lines meet at a single point? You know, the vanishing lines, as they call it, or when artists figured it out by drawing on glass. So what you perceive is not real because the lines are not diagonal. The lines maintain a parallel dimension, but your eyes will reflect it to you that the lines are meeting on the horizon. It's very, very interesting. So are we seeing reality, or are we not capable of seeing reality? That's always the concept behind it. Now, if you do your own research, or if you look up the images, you'll find there's no shortages of these thermal shroud images that we have of the Black Knight. And is this just simply something to show us that, yes, it's merely space junk? There's so much space junk up there. Granted, you don't really ever see space junk when you try to look at it on your own, whether with a naked eye or a telescope, but they assure us, you know, whether it's NASA or really any space agency in any government, that there's lots of space junk up there. And it's a serious problem. Yeah, Paulie says it really well. Trust nothing, question everything. And don't stop questioning things, because there might be other explanations. There might be other realities that we don't quite understand. Looks Egyptian. And maybe that's what they were going for, too. You know, I recall in the 1970s, there was that little bit of connection, and you saw it culminate in the original Battlestar Galactica series, where they had a little bit of a an Egyptian tone. Now, they dialed that down as the series went on, but when it started, it was pretty extensive. Like, I still remember when they went to the pyramids, I think it was on Kobol, not the depressing Kobol that they depicted in the reimagined series, but the original Kobol, which had incredible ruins of an ancient civilization and pyramids. And it's also where the original Baltar got his legs stuck, if you recall. So, yeah, you're right, Paul. There's a lot of Stargate connections, too. So, hey, Dallas, good to see you. Yeah, Nana, it is pretty well-designed space junk, isn't it? And if it's just a thermal shroud, it definitely seems to maintain a very coherent shape, doesn't it? But that's exactly what they want us to think. And of course, we get things like this. Big Brother really is watching. He's called the Black Knight satellite. So it brings to mind another possibility. Let's just say, oh yeah, there you go, Robert. Egyptians just found it. Yeah, possibly too. It brings to mind another possibility, though. Let us suppose that at whatever altitude, and whether you want to think of it as space or just very high altitude, because we know there are planes that fly. What if in the upper altitudes, what we may think of as the stratosphere or even beyond, there is a device up there? Some sort of device that was contacted or became aware, and, whether you want to think of it as the monolith or something else, a remnant of the old world. Some device that managed to keep the civilization connected. Was it a data storage device? Was it some sort of avatar? For that matter, could it even contain a method of artificial intelligence, or perhaps even some sort of, and by the way, when I say artificial intelligence on this channel, I'm talking about actual artificial intelligence, not what we are sold as artificial intelligence today. In other words, it's self-aware, it's sentient, it can make its own decisions, and it has autonomy. Certainly, no one would argue that what we're told is artificial intelligence today has any autonomy. You have to put in input, and then you get an output. In other words, it functions like a classic program. Oh, that's a good example there, Leo. Yes. Oh, the old probe concept. That is very interesting. But I suspect that if there really is something up there, and if it really does have connections to the old world, it really is old world technology, it's probably something much more than a probe. Again, I could be completely wrong because, I haven't seen it. But, oh, here's a good one from Kathy. What if the Black Knight is linked to the Black Rock? That's a very intriguing premise. And Black Rock does appear in many different locations. And no, not just the famous Black Rock in Mecca. It's a little bit more common than we like to think. Would you be surprised to know that in many of the explorations that I've done that have had technical difficulties, you may recall when I tried to explore a certain university in the Midwest, there was an actual example of Black Rock that was in the middle of the zodiac symbol in one of the main buildings on this university, and it was bona fide Black Rock. Very, very interesting. So, yeah, there could be a very definitive link for all we know. Yeah, or the black goo, another disclosure, if you will. And maybe that was the whole reason, Robert, why the plot of Prometheus was, well, let's just say, rewritten into obscurity, and it didn't really make a lot of sense. And don't even get me started on the so-called sequel. But yes, very good connection there. J Series J, considering how we store our digital items in the cloud nowadays, there's certainly much lore around this topic. And isn't it interesting how as our digital technology has advanced, and again, let's be honest, that's about the only technology we have a clear definition of advancement. In other words, something that we can actually do that we couldn't do 20, 40 years ago. Although maybe we could, and it was simply a matter of disclosure. But that's a very good point. Maybe there always was this ability in the cloud. And maybe that's really what the internet that we're using right now and talking to each other on still operates through. It's just built on this existing infrastructure of old world technology. It's all entirely possible. Yes. Well, Paulie, whenever you try to talk about Max, there's always interesting things that go on with that. I would definitely love to do a bio on him, but I've had great technical issues doing bios, so I've decided I should be a little bit more subtle in my approach. Clara, are all these magnets interacting with each other? There's definitely an interaction that's going on. It's just a question of how is it facilitated and what is it really about. Is this really the means that the world machine, if you recall that exploration that we did, where we posited that all of the great churches and many other structures are linked together as some part of a grand apparatus that is across all the land? And could these magnets, or this black material, as you want to call it, be the means in which they still communicate? Is it possible that this is some sort of living technology even? You may recall how they often say that granite is living rock. Well, is it really living rock, or is it some kind of advanced construction material? I mean, I know we're really going out in the realm of science fiction a little bit, but we really have to if we're actually going to grasp all the possibilities. Because as you all identified earlier, we're limited in so many ways in terms of what possibilities we're even supposed to consider. Paulie, connection between Black Knight device and Saturn as well. Well, just take a look at Saturn or Jupiter through a telescope on any given night and let me know if it really appears as you'd expect it to appear. I'll tell you, in all the times that I've looked at it, not once has it ever appeared in the way that I'd expect it to appear. Now, there's some other interesting principles behind this whole theory. And beyond the fact that, the mainstream just wants to write it off as a conspiracy theory and it's all related to ufologists, the fact that there's only supposed to be two ways to regard it: it's either space junk or it's an extraterrestrial device of some sort. You're just not supposed to think of it being some sort of human constructed device. And why is that? Is there a concern that there might be some way that some unauthorized individual could actually contact this device or actually operate on this system, if you will? Oh, this is a good one here. To me, Saturn looks so fake, much more elongated than I imagined. Yeah, that's kind of the way the Buddhas of Boston sports. I love that. That's kind of the way I felt when I looked at Jupiter and the moons for the first time. So, Jamie, there are a lot of rumors that Tesla did communicate with it. Although, again, what's the veracity of those rumors? I don't know. If there was documentation, it was certainly lost over time. It certainly wasn't just Tesla, though. There are rumors of all sorts of individuals who were trying to contact this device back in the heyday of shortwave radio. And you may wonder why they did away with all those radios. I remember my dad actually had one of those special shortwave radios. And there's all sorts of reasons given about why they had to do away with that. Kathy refers to a connection to CERN, possibly. If we talk about the CERN connection to Looking Glass or the actual master artificial intelligence that did survive from the old world. And that's an older exploration on the channel, but it's still a very relevant idea, I think, and it fits into this theory quite well. Hey, Sooner West, good to see you. Hey, Sean, good to see you. And who else just showed up? Hey, Sky Sage, thanks for joining us. But yes, so all these ideas fit together really, really well. And you could just say it's a coincidence, or perhaps what the Black Knight really exists as the definitive evidence that there really is a connection to the old world, that's really what's being concealed, that you're only supposed to see it either as an extraterrestrial device or space junk. And this is probably one of the more compelling images I've seen. And this is not one of the images that you tend to see on the mainstream. Now, again, are we actually going to be allowed to see any images of any true device up there? No, I sincerely doubt it. And when we see a lot of the imagery from what's purported to be space or even high altitude, it's certainly something that you've got to apply a lot of questioning to, because anybody can show anything on images. I mean, we could put in the USS Enterprise here, NCC 1701A, yeah, that was my favorite one, and say that they actually saw it up there at high orbit, much like in that original series episode. MB, why is granite a living rock? Well, that's what we're informed. That's what some people call it. But it's a great question. Is it really a living rock, or is it some sort of organic technology? Because one thing we don't know for sure is just how far advanced the previous civilization really became in their technological pursuits. Could they really produce materials? What if granite is actually an artificially produced material, but it functions as a living rock? Is that why it's so resilient? Is that why it's attributed to the construction of so many old world buildings, to include, my favorite Art Deco building in Rochester, Minnesota, the Plummer building, the base is all granite. But really, what is granite? That's a great point, and it's a great question. Yeah, there you go, Dallas. It is not easy to cut, and yet somebody was able to cut it and fashion it into perfect stones with perfect dimensions and a lot of right angles. It's just one of those things. Clara, I thought the rock would pull you into a hole. Well, maybe. And so if there is something, and there are sightings that people have in the sky all the time, what are you really seeing? Are you actually seeing a thermal shroud? Do you see other strange things in the sky? Whether you're looking with your naked eye, the binoculars, or the telescope. Well, yeah, there are accounts of people seeing strange things in the sky, but it's not nearly as common as we think. It's more of a rarity. Now, certainly when we're blasting off our latest rocket, or, as Donald Pleasance said in Newsbenders, we do our fireworks display at Cape Canaveral every day, whatever's actually going on there. It's one of those questions we have to ask. Is it just meant to divert our attention? Is the Black Knight satellite just to divert our attention and to keep us from really factoring in on what's actually going on? That there really is some sort of device, and it is potentially connected to a lot of the remnants of technology that we have in old world structures. And if that is indeed the case, then suddenly that revolutionizes a lot of these details that we've been looking at. Because now we actually have a concept for the way in which this extensive world machine, or this technological apparatus that extends across the many lands, are connected in a way. Oh, yeah, that's a good point. And something else with that, Clara, is what exactly is radioactive? What does that mean? Because, we seem to have many different meanings and applications for that which is radioactive, or what radiation actually is. So it's very intriguing. Ah, yes, and Robert refers to the moon. Yes, everything about the moon is very suspicious. Is it some kind of body in the sky? Is it merely an apparition that we see projected on the planetarium? Is it a plasma shadow where we see a map of the land? All those possibilities are always on the table because we really just don't know. Oh, that's a good one there, Charles. Maybe they reverse engineered fallen meteorites? It's possible. And I have actually seen a meteorite myself strike the ground. So, what exactly are meteorites? I didn't actually get up to it and didn't have that experience like that one guy did in the original Creep Show, played by Stephen King, no less, where he turned into a giant grass monster and then committed suicide. But yeah, it's all the concept. It all rolls together. So, the firm radioactive, says Sooner West. Yes. What exactly does it mean? It's one of those terms. And so going beyond, the concept of space junk and unidentified object and what it really is, and, is this just all we're supposed to focus on? Are there other things up there? Yeah, maybe you'll look up and you'll see a Pontiac Fiero. I love the Fast and the Furious. I'm being facetious. I did enjoy the first film. But it's very, very intriguing to me that when it comes to space exploration shown through movies, it's really a gigantic farce. Yeah, sure, you can just equip your Pontiac Fiero, and anybody who was around in the 1980s knows what those were notorious for. Launch it up into space, and you're good to go. So, that was a great story and cameo. So, Space Fraggle. Yes, ever so true. Yep, you got it, Tabor. That's exactly what he said. Very interesting that Stephen King could suddenly just become an actor, just like he could just suddenly become a director. Although, people say that the film he directed was, not so good. But, say what you want to say. But I go to this whole concept of the way the Fast and the Furious has devolved, if you will, to basically being a farce, because there's a reason for it. It's almost as though someone is just looking us in the face and giving us the proverbial bird, or flipping us off and saying, yeah, you can just launch a car into space because, space is not a difficult place to be. And let's not forget there was that Tesla we shot into space. And if you get on the right website, they'll put up a little square and tell you that they're still tracking it. Apparently, it's traveled quite a ways. So, yes, Spaceballs. Isn't it sad that Spaceballs is a more serious science fiction film than the Star Wars sequels? But, that's just my opinion. Make of it what you will. Now, here's something else that's peculiar beyond these theories of the Black Knight being an old world device that I want to bring up. And it does revolve into this whole concept of science fiction. And oddly enough, the lack of science fiction. So give me 1 second here. Let's pull up this image. Now, you may recall that we did talk about virtually one of the only science fiction films that talked about humanity returning to the moon. And it's really peculiar because it's as though it's not supposed to be an authorized, yeah, there you go, old world Starlink. And Starlink, isn't that interesting? I'm glad you brought that up, Tabor, because Starlink is something we're supposed to see. The big ducks in a row of lights that just go around. But we don't really see anything else when it comes to satellites. But by golly, you'll see Starlink. Yeah. And we won't even talk about all the ways that defies convention. No need to. Is that Dark Star? No, Polly, what we're all looking at here is a scene from the 1989 film Moontrap. Yes, the only film that really dealt with the following taboo concepts. In Moontrap, there was a confirmed human civilization that had reached technological ascendancy that was 14,000 years old. There was also encountering a device in low Earth orbit or high altitude, however you want to think about it. And these are all science fiction concepts that you won't see ever used. They were not allowed to be used back then. Yeah, Jamie's leaning ahead in the foxhole there. Kalium, absolutely. We'll talk about the Kalium in a second. What's that, Sky Sage? You've all heard of the anagram Mars, making automated replacement systems. Yeah, there's a lot of anagrams that just happen to fit in perfectly, aren't there, Sky Sage? Yes, Kathy, it was a very low-budget 1989 movie made by Glickenhaus Shapiro Productions and stars Walter Koenig, Mr. Chekhov himself, and Bruce Campbell. I'll show you a screenshot, here in a second. But you can watch it for free on YouTube, I do believe. But the whole premise of the film is a couple astronauts on a space shuttle encounter a derelict human spacecraft. They find the remnants of a human being that's been up there for 14,000 years, and this strange device that they can't penetrate or identify. And it turns out that that's actually what is the Kalium. As, yes, Michael, Walter Koenig was in it. I'll show you in a second, as Jamie referred to. And the Kalium is this device right here. It turns out, and what I like about the film Moontrap is the plot doesn't make it clear, were the Kalium some sort of technological device that the old humans had developed and then they turned against them? Or were they something else, some sort of device that had actually an extraterrestrial origin? The story doesn't make it clear. It's left for the audience to figure it out. But what's so terrifying about the Kalium, and I'll go from the fact that the humans actually developed it, it's essentially a self-aware device that can replicate and rebuild itself into killer cyborgs. And the whole use for human beings is they're simply to be chopped up as spare parts. And then when this Kalium resurrects itself, it actually uses the human beings. So you kind of mix it all together. You got the science fiction concepts, you've got the concept of the zombie, but you also have the concept of a cyborg entity that can reassemble itself. Yes, and oddly enough, Polly, this once again preceded what we had from the Borg. And we don't know if the Kalium are actually a hive mind. It's hinted that they are. So there's all kinds of terrifying concepts. Now, just to warn you all, there was a very terrible sequel from the 20-teens that came out. Don't bother with that. Just stick with the original one. And remember that this film was made with virtually no budget. And they really didn't have any kind of support whatsoever. It's amazing it even got made in the first place. So, yeah, actually, you're right, Tabor. Virus is probably closer in terms of a sequel, at least with the plot elements. Old Donald Sutherland showing up in that one. Anyways, here you go. So, yeah, imagine that. Mr. Chekhov teaming up with Bruce Campbell. And so Moontrap actually encounters a lot of these ideas. The ideas of coming across something that's in low Earth orbit or high altitude, however you want to look at it, finding a connection to an old human civilization 14,000 years ago. And remember, beyond Atlantis, you can't even refer to that. And it also has the concept of these killer cyborgs technology from this previous human civilization that turned against them and ultimately destroyed them. Yeah, that's right. Bruce was fresh off Maniac Cop, and Walter Koenig was about to come out in Star Trek V. I'll tell you what, though, I'd still rather watch Star Trek V any day of the week over any of the newer Star Treks, but that's just me. And so here's what you have. You have the Kalium device, and what it's actually able to do is it uses spare parts, it salvages, and this particular one just simply salvaged some wreckage from a lab, and even the remnants of the 14,000-year-old human body to make itself a new body. And then suddenly it becomes this terrifying weapon of death. And some pretty good stage shots in this film. I have to give them credit, especially given the fact that they had a shoestring budget. It is very competently directed, and even the plot is interesting to give you enough clues without giving everything away. Yes, I know. But it's kind of funny when you read reviews of the film from 1989 and they say, well, it's getting to be a little cliche. We've done this quite a few times. Oh, where are those reviewers now in the 21st century when we're just honestly remaking everything? Or my new favorite, converting every anime into live action, by inserting live action actors into, what's all computer generated imagery. Oh, excuse me. It's all AI generated imagery, right? Because there's a big difference. Well, and you know what's it's funny you refer to Hardware, Polly. It's the exact same concept. And Hardware was filmed that same year and came out in I think it was released in 1990. So yeah, if you're looking for a two film feature that really reflects these concepts very well and has the concept of reset, old world civilization, old humanity, watch the film Moontrap first and then watch Hardware. They're both really good and they're both very interesting. Oh, by the way, yeah, it did come out after Moontrap, but I think they were filmed about the same time, Paulie. By the way, in another coincidence of coincidences, there's a character in Hardware called Lincoln Weinberg. He plays the next door neighbor and a pervert. And no, I'm not making it up. That's actually his name from 1990. Yeah, it's not a joke. Oh, there you go, Jamie, all over it again. It was a 2000 AD story. Yes. And in fact, the original author of the 2000 AD story actually sued the film and so then got credit for it in Hardware. But it's kind of funny because, in Terminator, nobody sues James Cameron, but they still ended up putting a credit to Harlan Ellison. So, yeah. All those little things that all come together. But you see these ideas, and yet for whatever reason, with all of our remakes and reimaginings, no one's really ever gone back to this idea for some reason. It's as though you could never talk about, hey, why didn't we go back to the moon? Which, by the way, in the film Moontrap, it's one of the very few stories where we go back to the moon. And no, I'm not talking about For All Mankind. Yes, my good old favorite writer behind that one. I'm not even going to say his name, Ronald D. Moore. So, Leo, way too many red flags regarding the moon. Would not be surprised if it's somehow connected with the Black Knight satellite. And that could be possible too. Whatever the actual nature or reality of the moon really is, Leo, that could be possible. Heck, could it be some sort of projection from the Black Knight satellite, or what we think of as the Black Knight satellite? Who knows for sure? Hey, Heidi, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Clara. But when you put all this together, when you look at all of these concepts, starting with the Black Knight and really looking at it as an old world device and how all of these concepts overlap, it's pretty amazing that you actually have every major theme of the old world all reflected in this. So, oh yeah, it could be creating the hologram of the moon. So, Paulie, are you familiar with the Phobos incident? Speaking of moons and strange satellites in craft. I am. There's the trouble with the Phobos incident, though, is there actually is a lot more legitimate documentation with it. But then there also seems to be some very definitive, how shall we say, rumored concepts that have been revolved into it. So it's almost as though someone's trying to discredit that as well. But again, Paulie, you're right. It is more evidence that there is something going on. So, Tabor, all intricate workings of the world machine. So beautiful, really. And that could exactly be how everything really fits together. The big piece, if you will, that we're missing. We can only interface with the inert technology that's in the remaining structures on the land, but the actual technology that is still animated, operational, if you will, is somewhere way up in sky where we can't reach it. Whether you want to think of it as space, whether you want to think of it as high altitude, it doesn't really matter. Physically, we can't interface with it. But there may be a means that we can actually communicate with it, and perhaps that's one of the reasons why we saw shortwave radio, all of those ham radio operators, that entire subculture, if you will, has really just disappeared. Now, of course, the official reason is, well, we have the internet. Why would anybody want to mess around with that stuff? It's a waste of time. But it is very interesting how it just completely went away very quickly. And yes, by all means, please hit the likes. These member live stream explorations are the most fun because I get the real opportunity to interface with you all. And this is the part I enjoy the most because it's putting all these ideas together. I think we get a lot closer to the truth instead of, well, maybe I should just be careful when I say truth because, when somebody wants to tell a lie, the first thing they're going to tell you is, hey, I'm telling you the truth. Let's not forget the ministry of truth. Perhaps we should just say, understanding what really happened. It's by sharing ideas that we're going to get there. So, what a mystery. It is a very intriguing and intricate mystery, I think, Heidi. And I don't think it's as simple as we're led to believe it is in many ways. There's no riffraff anywhere, Polly. There's just people saying things because they have to say things. But if what we were doing didn't have an impact, nobody would be saying anything now, would they? So, well, I appreciate that. So, there's been some interesting things that have been going on the last several weeks, and there's no doubt about it. And I'll admit I've been a little bit more, perhaps, direct in how I've approached some topics, although I haven't said anything different or suggested anything that I didn't before. I've got to admit, on the last exploration that I did, originally about secret organizations, and then I changed the title on it to Reset Masters. I'm sure you can figure out why I did that. And if not, well, I'm sure you can guess. But it was very intriguing because there was a certain organization I really didn't talk about at all in that exploration. And you know what organization that was. It's, the usual suspects. Of course, the organization we're all supposed to talk about, right? Because that's who got referred to in the little addendum that got put underneath that exploration, which is very, very interesting because I didn't really say anything about that organization. I mean, I was talking about the Knights of Pythias, whatever. I was talking about the International Order of Oddfellows. I was not talking about you-know-who. But it's as though we're supposed to talk and think about you-know-who all the time, aren't we? I hate when people say to be honest, so everything else is a lie. Well, it's kind of funny because it's as though, once again, we are filled with expectations that, yes, everything is a lie. But then, of course, there are certain things we can't question or think about because those things most definitively are not a lie. So, yeah, there you go, Robert. If it's a secret, we would not know. And that's actually what I probably get the most difficulty with my channel in saying. There are secrets that you just simply don't talk about. Or, as is said at the start of the book, Nine Gates in the Kingdom of Shadows, the first engraving and the most important one, silence is golden. And yes, there are people who do practice the concept of silence is golden. When they want you to know about something, they're going to call it a secret organization. When they want to draw attention to something, they're going to say it's a secret. That's exactly right. But there are people out there who know the rule, silence is golden. Or, as they say, the golden rule. That golden rule. Niagara Falls and structure that once was. Well, we'll have to follow up with that at some point, Michael. I'd like to get back to Niagara Falls. So, Kathy, when are you going to do a follow-up video on the Hoover Dam? When I can get my booty there, Kathy. I need to do something on site because there's been a lot of interesting developments with the Hoover Dam. And that's also something else that's appeared in mainstream pop culture quite a few times, including in that less than sufficient Transformers movie from Michael Bay. Yeah, we saw what they used it for then. So, yeah, there you go, Mr. Something Else. It's not just the first rule, it's also the second rule. Don't talk about it. And, you know, hey, Bob, I'm a member. Well, that's just it. You know, multiple secret societies. And for the Prime Explorers, you're actually going to get a little bit of an inside look in how that's reflected when we look at the Deltas and the Omegas on Friday night. So, well, and the other thing, Kathy, is there's some things on site that I really want to get a look at and see if I can actually share them in the exploration, because the trouble is, unless you can actually get on site, there's certain things that I can't really display on the video. And I really want to be able to display that and show what's actually going on there because it's quite intriguing. Yeah, it's true, Sky Sage. Money does talk. At least money matters for some people, but it does not seem to matter for other people. Weird Art Deco sculptures. Oh, well, it's actually even weirder than that, Dallas. That's actually only probably about a 4 or 5 on the scale of 10 with the Hoover Dam. There's a lot of 9 and 10 stuff that certainly didn't appear in, well, I think there'd be an issue if it appeared in any exploration. But don't worry, what I'm probably going to do is I'll do a main publication of the Hoover Dam, and then, of course, we'll do a members live stream follow-up where just all of us will take a look at some of the 9 to 10 on the 10 scale of strangeness and see what you think. Anyways, so I hope you enjoyed this exploration, and it does give you an idea of how everything may tie together with the old world devices in the sky and the structures. And don't forget about the black material itself, which does appear all over the place. So, +1 for the members, only 9 out of 10 exploration. So, yeah, it definitely got hot fast, didn't it, Polly, in no time. Kathy, it's the ground that's granite pad that's being dug up at the Hoover Dam. Well, there's actually a little bit something else that they've been digging up, but they don't show that. So we'll definitely talk about it. What's our real story? I visited the Hoover Dam years ago before I could see things I see now. I'm going to have to look at the pictures I took then. I think what really got me was watching that very interesting time-lapse construction video they have of it. That's got to be one of my favorites. What's our real story? Beyond any shadow of a doubt. All right. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this exploration. And for Prime Explorers, we've got a double feature coming out on Thursday and Friday. Going back to one of my favorite topics of looking at the Bill of Rights. And then Friday, looking at the concept of anarchy versus fascism. So, well, thank you for joining us, and we will see you again soon. Take care, everybody. And this is Lucius Aurelian signing off.